So this is part 2 of the video on how to teach circling. In part 1, I talked about what the different styles of circling you can do are at a very basic level. And now, how to actually teach it. Now, this is a hugely broad topic. Like, I've spent the last couple years thinking about this, not only on how to teach circling, but how to teach in general. Um, because I believe that people learn quite differently. There's people who learn best by hearing things. There's people who learn best by reading. There's people who learn by trying something out. I tend to focus towards the experiential because I think getting a more embodied sense is important. But something I'm going to talk about in this video is the balance between certainty and uncertainty. How if we just throw somebody into an experience with no context, likely they can't absorb a lot of it. Some people have a higher capacity for this than others and are actually comfortable with a fair degree of uncertainty, but many of us need a ground underneath us, or our system can't actually integrate what's going on. It's like, I don't know, the image always comes to me almost like a molecule that's vibrating very quickly. It's in an unstable position, or it like needs an electron in order to feel whole. And if it doesn't have that electron, it's like kind of always like, like I can't quite rest. And like, you may have to provide an electron or two before the atom can settle down. So that's one thing. So I guess what I'd say in teaching circling is the first thing is, who are you teaching it to and why do they want to learn it? Context matters a surprising amount. I work with groups of all different types, and one thing I find is, even if I'm doing the same training in an authentic community, which city I'm in actually matters a lot, and what cultures the people are coming from. And the reason that we say this is, even the degree of certainty versus uncertainty that someone can stand matters on the culture. Like, I would say that in Austin, I can throw people into shadow work and they love it. Like, they don't need a ton of context. But it's a community that knows each other quite well and is comfortable. If I try that in Boulder with a group of people that are fairly new to each other in a culture that's a little bit more reserved, I get a lot of questions, I get a lot of pushback. I need to be clear on who my audience is. And then second of all, why are they even here? Because what we need to speak to when we're teaching is, like, what matters such that we're spending time on this. If one person wants connection and the other person wants the ability to like provide deep insight and transformation, we're going to want a very different experience. And you find this coming out when you've got tension between two people where they both seem to be doing a practice but holding very different values. So first thing, get clear on your intention, actually have a conversation about it, start getting curious, start practicing circling even as you're exploring this. Why are we here? Who are we? What are we doing? So that's point one. Other thing is getting clear on what you are doing, because as you train, you do need some sort of ground under you, which could be what you're valuing. Like, are we doing this in order to form a stronger community? If so, cool. Let's measure our practices against the standard of, do we actually feel more strength in our community? Or do we feel like we're constantly rehashing and bringing up conflict that's eroding us? Maybe we need to try something else, like holding out more of a space of empathy and listening to each other and doing that form of circling, and toning down the focus on withholds and conflict for a little while. Things like that. Losing my train of thought a bit. But yeah, I would say that when you're then going into teaching circling, or teaching anything really, there's kind of this yin and yang. One part of it is the framework to give. Now, we do need some sort of framework, because if we don't have one, we map on what we already know. So if you've ever circled with a whole group of new people and you don't set super clear context of what the expectation of participants are, you'll notice that some people start, defaulting to a form of therapy they've learned. Some other people kind of stay quiet in the background because that's their norm. Some other people start like offering coaching, or maybe sharing impact if they have done embodied work, or some of it feels like what you want and some of it doesn't, and there's this confusing moment of like, fuck, like I'm not getting quite what I want, what do I do? Well, often you just haven't told people what to expect. So you need to have an idea of what the practice you're doing is and what it isn't, even if you're just defining that circle by circle. So often I'll tell people, what we're doing is a practice of being with each other in presence. We're meditating on the experience of connection. And if we're circling one person, we're meditating with them as the focus. Like, we're noticing our own sensations and emotions and thoughts in reaction to what's happening right here and now with them and with us. and we're exploring the quality of the connection. Now, what can that look like? We're going to sit in a circle. We're going to have our attention on one person. I, as the facilitator, am going to be like an air traffic controller, which means that I'm going to be kind of guiding the process. I'm going to be following my own curiosity. I'm not going to be the only one speaking. If you guys have something you want to say, you're welcome to bring it in. And trust your experience. Like, just try it out. If you say something, I may redirect you, I may rephrase it. And what I'm looking for is how we're impacted moment by moment by each other. And the easiest way to get to that is either by literally sharing impact, which could be, when you said this, I felt this. Or it could be context, like, when you said that, I wanted to give you advice. We're getting to a bit of a deeper cut of what's actually happening as we're here and now. So if you're, unsure of what to say, default to sharing impact, sharing context, or sharing something that you notice on an objective level and are curious about. Also, in circling, we're not aiming to change anything about the person. This is where it can differ a little bit from traditional therapy or coaching. Maybe the circlee talks about having multiple personality disorder or severe depression or trauma. We're actually, rather than trying to say, oh, like, I totally have resources for you, let me give them to you, we're actually going to be with, like, what is that like? And is there any place in our life where we've felt that or we're feeling it in the moment, and sharing that? This human-to-human connection is something we so rarely get, because often it's not safe enough to experience and know that we can come out of it at the end. So this is a container where we can explore things that may be difficult, and we can explore real experience and be safe in doing it. And afterwards, you choose what degree of connection you want with the people in the circle. So that's a framework. I could have said it more simply, but now people have an idea of what sort of things they might say in the circle, what the circle is going to look like. I'd also say how long it is. Like, this is going to be 45 minutes. We're going to do a debrief afterwards or not. What circling is and isn't, and maybe even like why we do it, which is the human-to-human connection. So basically, like, framework. And if you're teaching circling, that's equally important. Like, what is the framework that you're teaching? Are you doing it that you set context, you meditate, you connect, you look around the circle and connect with other, and then you weave shared reality, the way the Integral Center teaches it? Are you doing it that, like, you set some context and then you just start and anyone's welcome to speak? Are participants raising their hands or not? Are you looking for a particular thing from the circlee, like, an embodiment, a sensation or an emotion? I circle often without asking about the body at all if it doesn't seem like where somebody is naturally geared to go. So, have an idea of what your basic framework is, and teach your community, your participants, the framework, and maybe even crowdsource, like, what elements should be within the framework, like curiosity, empathy, self-expression, self-awareness, the ability to reveal, awareness of the group, ability to redirect and pause, like all of these things, and then maybe you fit them into meta categories, like self, other, group. Context is one I use a lot of the time. So, like, some sort of grounding, because if we don't have that, our minds are so occupied by looking for clarity that they can't actually focus on what we're doing. Circling, motorcycle. You never know what the world's going to throw at you. Circling is a practice with a lot of uncertainty already, so provide clarity when you can. So you got the framework, and then the other side of it is the uncertainty, which is actually like, what is somebody's natural expression? How do they naturally tend to circle? And leave space for this as well. And, like, if you have somebody in a circle who's doing something that's like, you're not quite sure if it's circling, but it's pretty cool, maybe kind of check in with yourself, like, in the debrief, where did that feel like a circling as you consider the practice, and where didn't it? And have a conversation, but allow for somebody's form of doing something to be different than yours. And maybe you have some practice circles where you just throw the framework out the window. You say, get this person's world however you naturally would. And then afterwards you discuss what that looked like. And the last thing I'd say is just lots of practice. Just try it, give each other feedback, try it, give each other feedback, allow yourself to fuck up, notice where different members of your community are having a common issue, and find a game around it from the games manual. Say, like, hey, we're being triggered and having a big issue maintaining our curiosity. So let's trigger each other and then play the curiosity game. You could do something like that. The last thing I will say is so one example, there were two other questions that Laura had specifically that I'm going to address at the end, which are how do you redirect in a circle and when do you pause? But before that, I want to talk really quickly about the debrief. And the debrief is an important part of circling teaching because it's when we get feedback from each other. The best way to do this is to create a space, so close the circle formally, like, hey, we're done. Let's all bow to each other. Let's all share a moment of impact, share what we got about the circle, whatever. We're closed. Cosmic cutters, however you want to do it. Now we're going to move into a debrief. We're not going back into the emotional content of the circle. We're not circling again. We're sharing about how the circle was on a more technical or theoretical level. So that's one thing. And as the facilitator, you actually have to be really sure that it doesn't go back into the processing of the circle. When you're sharing impact, gear towards what the moment was that you noticed, like what somebody said or what the reaction was, and then how it impacted you. Did you feel safe? Did you feel unsafe? Did you feel open? Whatever it is. So like the more specific you can get, the better. There's not so much someone can do with the phrase, I felt really uncomfortable in that whole circle. Why? Was that about them? Was that about you? Like, did it start when they set the context? Did it start when they made a certain comment? So like get granular. Leave space for impact. Like, how does that land with the circlee? Not so much justification, like make sure that the feedback is actually landing and ask them even like, hey, did that land for you? Like you seem defensive or what's coming up for you right now? And like, ask them at the end, what are they taking away? What are they learning? Maybe you have somebody taking notes on the debrief. The other thing is if you're getting feedback, take it with a grain of salt, but let it land. One of our evil circling facilitators in town likes to say in his context, that doesn't land as the battle cry of the loser, which is strong, but I believe also somewhat true. We don't learn if we don't let things actually impact us and take it in as a possibility, even if it doesn't fully resonate for us. And if you're sharing your opinion, share it without attachment. If it doesn't land for the person who was circling, it doesn't land, and that's fine. You could approach them a while later and say like, hey, I want to clarify, but don't like push it in. They don't have to get it. And if you feel like they have to get it, it probably means you have something that's been triggered that you could look at, which could actually be really valuable. Like, is there a value you're holding that got bypassed in that circle? And what does that tell you about what circling is to you and what intention you want to hold? And doesn't need to be the same for everybody. In Austin, there are forms of circling that I really don't like happening because I don't think that they meet my criteria of inclusivity or my value of safety. But that's my value, and it works for me. And there are some people that want challenge, that want unsafety, that want more lack of context, and they go to those circles, and I have to come to terms with that. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. I hope that's useful. And I'm going to say just 2 quick points on this idea of redirecting and pausing. So redirecting, different ways you can do this. Number 1, restating the context. Hey, I really appreciate what you just said. So 1, acknowledge that something was said. Maybe appreciate the intention behind it. Like, it seems like you really want to care for this person in this moment. Like, it's like you're really standing for her to succeed. And in circling, we're aiming towards being with what is rather than trying to change it. So like in your phrase, I'd love to coach you on this, I want to know what actually motivated that. Like, what were you feeling had you want to coach the person? So like context, maybe asking what was beneath it, especially like what were you valuing or what had you share? What had you share is like the best phrase in the redirect. But do it with an attitude of openness rather than, what had you share that right then? People feel that. Another thing could be sharing the impact on you. Like, ooh, when you said that, I felt a little defensive or protective. Like, I imagined if that were shared towards me, I might feel like I hadn't been fully heard. And then like to the circlee, I'm curious how it was for you to hear. So you can kind of diffuse it by like running it through yourself, like how you would feel or how you felt in the moment. You could ask just directly how it lands on the circlee, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. If the circlee is somebody who's quite like people pleasing, they may. It's actually something to notice in a circle. If everything a participant says lands with the circlee and has an impact, if they're like, oh yeah, like that, oh yeah, that, or like, yeah, I would like that, it's like there's probably something they're looking to fill in themselves that they're actually looking for outside support to do so. And it gets confusing. You're like, I want to redirect, but this is like supposedly proving useful to them, but there's this thing happening. Call out the pattern. Seems like everything everybody says lands for you. And I don't think I've yet heard what you want. So, like, is this pattern something that you notice? How is it for you? Not even necessarily what do you want, but just like, do we have shared reality that there's a thing happening here? So that can almost like derail all redirects because it points out what's happening in the first place, that the questions are being allowed to continue. Yep, I think those are the main things I'll say on redirect. And then lastly, on the pause, when do you pause a circle? Okay, learning to pause is a huge fucking skill, and it's really hard to learn. It's really countercultural to stop somebody in the middle of what they're saying and be like, excuse me, I know you're talking, but so do it as gently as you can and do it. Because if you're unwilling to pause a circle, if you're unwilling to stop somebody as they're speaking, people will stop trusting your leadership as much. You're not holding to this being a practice, you're holding it to being an open sharing circle. So try to find a good place, but if you can't, you might even end up just speaking over the person like, hey, I want to interrupt you for a minute. I really want to know what you're feeling right now. I want to know what's having you share this. I want to know what the connection with us is like. I feel nervous. Whatever it is. You can bring it to yourself, you can bring it to the other, you can bring it to the group, you can bring it to the text. I generally choose to pause when I'm feeling a strong emotion or an impact, and I want to make sure that we don't just go on without that being spoken, because often those strong impacts are great feedback. Somebody doesn't realize that they're talking and losing the circle. Somebody doesn't realize that there was a really beautiful emotional moment with the circlee right then, and another participant is about to share, and you're going to lose that moment. And it's just like, hey, can you hold that comment for just a second? I really want to know what's happening for you, circlee, in this moment. Like, those are like just moments of glorious connection. Okay, so that's my quick, semi-quick debrief on some of the main elements of teaching circling. I hope you enjoy this. I would love if you want to comment and share some of your own techniques. And if you're interested, our circling training in Boston is going to start at the end of February, and we still have a couple slots left open. It's going to be a really revolutionary way of teaching circling focused on competencies of creating relationship that you can bring into your life in every situation and have a really strong focus on life application. So contact me if you're interested in that at sarah@authrev, SARA at AUTHREV.com. All right, until next time.